I'm a security specialist, so I studied engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer with a focus on crisis management. And then I worked at a big corporation in Düsseldorf at Metro AG in corporate security, and my boss said, Malte, we have to go digital because otherwise we will just end up as parking space guardians if we don't also fight crime online. So this is how I came to digital security, and right now I work in a startup in Berlin that is also a cybersecurity startup where we have a lot of people working on the user experience. So this is how those two topics come together today, and I hope I can make it a little bit interesting. The first two questions that I would like to answer is first, why is digital security or also information security, why is that important? And to answer this, I have a little video clip.
Your body is not who you are. You shed it like a snake sheds its skin. You transfer the human consciousness between bodies to live eternal life.
How long have I been down?
250 years.
So this is a video clip of a new series from from Netflix, which I really enjoyed. And why is this relevant? Because I think that when I was to the Silicon Valley last October, I obsessed with Ray Kurzweil and the Singularity University, which basically is saying that at some point the machines will be smarter than us, and also that means that our soul, the way we are as humans, will be digitized. So they say software eats the world, and that means including our human soul, which sounds crazy, but I think that this series, which is why I wanted to show it, quite well captures the idea, because if you look at big data, if you look at the Google Maps pattern of where you've been, you can see the patterns, and I think if everything becomes digitized, that means also including our identity, and this is why cybersecurity is important. And yeah, so information architecture is also the science of finding information, and the darknet, if you use the onion network, also known as Tor, this is the place to be for criminals where they can find and organize themselves in this security space. For example, in the beginning, if you use a tool, you have to be specialized. You needed to be able to have really good hacking skills to attack someone. Now you just go to the darknet, buy a Tor, and you buy a perfect setup exploit kit, which you can use for hacking. So it becomes commoditized that you can just buy an exploit kit for maybe between $10 and $50, and you use that exploit kit to send a malware to the person or to the enterprise you want to attack and steal information from or steal identities from. So this is why information architecture is really interesting in the darknet. And also the last point, which I deeply believe, is that security at the expense of user experience is at the expense of security. So that means if something is too complicated, people will just not do it. A good example for that is pretty good privacy. Someone of you use pretty good privacy for encrypting emails? One. And how? Oh, two, okay. How many of you are using WhatsApp to exchange messages? Okay. And so the point that I would like to make today is also that WhatsApp, that uses the Signal protocol, is a very good example of combining security with a good user experience. So I would like to elaborate on that a little bit later also. This is what I just talked about, and this is also it's way too small for you guys, but from the distance. It's just the scheme of how asymmetric encryption works. And a long time in the security sphere, people said security always comes at the expense of usability and user experience. And then Moxie Marlinspike, which is a cryptographer who lives in San Francisco, said, I don't believe in this paradigm. And he founded OpenWhisper Systems, which is the creator behind the encryption you use in WhatsApp every day. So I thought that's one of the people that really inspires me to also work in security and not just say, oh, people don't use security, they reuse passwords, they're really dumb. But instead to focus on how can we make this more usable. And what he achieved with what Moxie Marlinspike achieved is when you look at PGP, there are about 5 million people that have a key in PGP upload to the servers, and that's mostly nerds, security researchers, and people from universities. And compare that to 1 billion or even more active WhatsApp and WhatsApp users currently. And also as a side note, how came this collaboration? It's a typical Silicon Valley story that the girlfriend of Moxie Marlinspike was invited to a party, and so Moxie came along and met Brian Acton, who was one of the co-founders of WhatsApp, and that's how this collaboration came to life. So the goal today is to learn how can we create user experiences for great information architecture. About me, I have a certificate which is called a Certified Information System Security Professional. One of the most interesting things is that while I was at Metro AG, we founded the cybercrime teams. There was nothing before, so we had to fight a lot of political fights to get this established and then also make it more known. And when you work in security, what I often observe that people say, oh, we don't have security incidents. But then we dig deeper and we found incidents with millions of euros of losses. And they were covered up because the people were ashamed if they were not the cause, but they didn't react properly. Then I worked last year as a consultant for security operations centers, and right now, as I mentioned, for Wirz, which is a cybersecurity startup. So if you own a car, you're probably a member of ADSC, so that if your car breaks down, they can pick you up and give you a replacement car and also help you. So Wirz is aiming to do the same, but for small and medium businesses in the cybersecurity sphere. So if they have a cybersecurity incident, the team and me will try to resolve the issue, and if this cannot be done in a reasonable amount of time, we will even send forensic experts. And the main goal of the user experience at Wirz was that the information security sphere is very elitist and people are talking shit to each other. Oh, I can hack even bigger companies and all that, but we want to make it really accessible and put a focus on the human user that we will support them. So the definitions of what we talked about today is user experience. It's about experience and interaction. Information security has the 3 goals of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is also often abbreviated as CIA. And what you observe often is with security specialists, they say, oh, I'm so super safe, no one can hack me. But then they totally forget the last goal is also availability. That means if you're so safe, it maybe means that your PGP solution only works on a desktop computer and you can't access on a mobile phone. So also the solutions, but most of the time people forget it's about all 3. The most important thing to know about information security is, if you're interested in that, is to ask the question, what is your threat model? So if you're a journalist that often travels to Syria, then maybe your threat models is to be safe against Turkish authorities that are involved in Turkey, or Russian or even German authorities. If you work in a normal enterprise and you have competitors, this is what I saw a lot during my time at Metro, with smaller companies that competitors try to hack you and steal your customer information, customer lists. And also the threat model at Metro AG was that I observed that criminal attacks are the most interesting concerning their financial targets. So criminals interested in the money. An example was social engineering. The typical way of social engineering is that it uses the way we humans interact with each other, which is based on trust, and exploiting that. So just like a hacker that uses computers to get into your enterprise, the most successful attempts are when hardware and software and people are all attacked at the same time. So an example was identity theft, which is why I also think this Netflix series about identities in the digital age is so interesting. And the most common attack was someone would impersonate one of our chief financial officers, either in Germany or abroad, because they have in every country an own organization. And then they would take the identity of this chief financial officer and go with it to one of our financial accountants and say via email or phone, for a really secret and yet unannounced merger, we need you to wire money, 2 million euros, to this Hong Kong bank account. And so now social engineering comes into place. First, they use authority. Second, they use urgency and say, you need to do this now. It's super urgent. If you don't act now, this deal will blow away. And then lastly, threats. They will say, also if you don't apply right now, I will also take consequences. And you'd be surprised that even really smart people would give into that. And combine this with a little bit technical savvy to make your email look really like it comes from the CFO. The compliance rate is really high, and so we had many cases on that. We had like a huge awareness campaign, and I think that's one of the interesting things for information securities, that you can always ask yourself, if you want to be better at that, what's my threat model? Information architecture is about definability and understandability. As I mentioned, in the darknet, they have a really good information architecture for cyber criminals. And this is what I want to talk about today. How does security work? We talk a lot about security risk, but what does it actually mean? It also means that we have a likelihood of something happening, like you receiving a spam mail. That's really often. But what is the impact on that? If it has a malware, it can have a high impact. If it's just advertisement, it's a very low impact. So this is the theoretical model, but it's quite late, so we'll not go too much into detail. And also another problem of user experience in security is that people do not intrinsically like change. So I work in incident response, and this means I work on the right model, which is a very grateful place to be in security. Because if I talk to you about security, and none of you had any security incidents in the past months or so, you will be maybe so interested, but not that much. I mostly work with people who were just hacked, so their motivation is super high. They really like to change and make sure this doesn't happen again. And so good managers often use that crisis times to introduce a lot of changes. Another thing would be if you know that you want to become proficient for cybersecurity, for a new job, for an interview, then this motivation will only slightly ascend till the day you have your interview, or if your company until you have your audit. So this is less spectacular, but also can give a lot of motivation. Or when you have exams in school, it's the same thing. Social engineering, what I talked about earlier, what are the main motivators and the main factors? It's very small, I didn't know the presentation would be so small. It's the first thing is hope and fear. This is a very strong driver, and especially in security, they use a lot of fear mongering that says, if you don't act now, you will take terrible damage. We try with Perseus to make it more on the hope factor, that the people will feel really comfortable with us. Also, second thing is social acceptance and rejection. When I was in Silicon Valley last October, there was a lot of talking about one of the former ex-managers on growth hacking in Facebook. I can't remember their name right now, but I can write to you on Twitter if you're interested. And he's now working at Social Capital, and he said he made head news because he said he's deeply regretful of what he created at Facebook, because they are at the very core of Facebook a social acceptance feedback loop. So that means you're on Facebook, you scroll through your timeline and it doesn't feel so good, but then you see, oh, I got some likes for my post, and the likes are a symbol, an abstract symbol for your social acceptance, and that feels really good, and this is why people keep coming back to Facebook a lot. And so this feedback loop is the core of the business model of Facebook. And yeah, the last social engineering technique is pleasure and pain. Of course, we will always seek pleasure and try to avoid pain. What does user experience and user interface mean? When you use PGP or WhatsApp, what we see is the solution, and what the solution, aka the company of WhatsApp, sees, or Facebook sees, is our behavior. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the user interface. The user experience is a lot more which cannot be seen. I just want to, it's very theoretical, but just as a reminder. And one of the last examples is, we talked about this today a lot, PGP and Signal. And WhatsApp uses the encryption protocol from Signal.